Our topic for today is PPD, Deliverable and Design Tool. David Stutzman, CSI, CCS, AIA, SCIP, Lead AP, is the Specifying Practice Group's thought leader. For those of you who are new to the group, Dave is a registered architect and founding principal of the largest independent architectural and engineering specifications consulting firm in the United States. Dave has 35 years of experience in specifications, preliminary project descriptions, and quality assurance reviews. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. Your participation during today's webinar is encouraged, and our speaker has allowed time to take your questions throughout the presentation. Although attendee audio lines are muted, you may click the Raise Hand button to indicate that you have a question or comment. We will identify you by name and unmute your line, at which point you may begin speaking. If you are participating via streaming audio and do not have a computer microphone, you may type your question into the chat box. Please keep your question and comments on the topic at hand. At the end of the discussion, we'll open the floor to general comments. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Erica, and welcome everybody. I'm glad you could join us for this meeting, and I am pleased to introduce to you today as our guest presenter, Louis Metcalf. Louis is the CSI committee chairman who chaired the task team responsible for CSI's newest PDF format. Louis is also a senior quality director for Gresham Smith and Partners in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a large multidiscipline firm with offices in several states, and he's managing the firm's specifications and quality assurance programs. Louis has been active in CSI since joining in 1982 and has served on a number of national committees, including CSI's PPD task team. So with that, I'd like to introduce Louis Metcalf, and I'm glad to have you here with us today, Louis.
Thank you, David. From the title, you might see that we often think of the preliminary project description as being a deliverable for schematic design phase, but in fact, one of the points that we're going to try to establish today is that it is an effective design tool. I'm sorry, I'm experiencing some. There we go. We're going to talk today a little bit about the history and recent development of the concept of the preliminary project description, or PPD, I'll probably be saying all the afternoon, and about how to use it for analysis and communication, as well as a deliverable, as we talked about. And then we'll get into a few early some simple ideas about how to get started in writing a PPD if you've never written one before. And I'm going to ask Erica to take a brief survey and find out how many people have actually written preliminary project descriptions based on Uniformat instead of design narratives in the past. Erica?
Okay, we've launched the poll. And Louis, if you wouldn't mind speaking up a bit, please.
All right. Is this better?
Yes, sir. Thank you. We'll give everyone a few more moments.
I might mention while we're waiting for the responses that there is an article in the May issue of the Construction Specifier that has a lot of the material that I'm going to present today.
Okay, Louis, and we have 67% do not write PPDs.
Ah, well, good. We'll see if we come up with some converts then.
And back over to you.
All right, thank you. The history of the preliminary project description really goes back about 20 years. It was first introduced in the 1989 edition of the Manual of Practice and has been in the Manual of Practice ever since then. But as you can see from our little brief survey, many people who are very knowledgeable in the specifications area are not familiar with the concept and have not done it in the past. Early last year, the Institute decided that it would be good to review the PPD program, and they instituted a task team to prepare a new standalone guide publication called PPD Format that was published last month that would explore the subject in a little more detail and also respond to some of the current industry trends that are affecting the PPD. So David actually was on that task team, and we worked in parallel with the Uniformat revisions that are being tidied up right now and will be published shortly. And again, these are the things that we were looking at. And one of the things that we presented in the PPD format that's new is an alternative version for the format of what this thing might physically look like. And we'll discuss that a little bit later. The industry trends that I want to discuss very briefly that affect the preliminary project description and how we look at projects just in general, we need to rethink the way we do our work. Our BIM, with the emphasis on the I, the information, integrated project delivery, sustainability, and the concept of lean architecture and engineering. Now, probably a lot of you have heard about lean manufacturing, and there's a Lean Construction Institute, and there is actually now a leanarchitecture.org website for gathering ideas on how to streamline and make more efficient our process of doing design projects, whether they're architectural or engineering or a combination. All of these trends have one thing in common, or a couple of things in common, is that they require a better understanding of the project earlier in the process, and more design decisions are going to be made earlier in the process. This diagram, which is very diagrammatic and is not by any means based on actual numbers, shows the basic concept that in the previous method of doing projects, the orange line, the bulk of the work takes place towards the end of design development and throughout construction documents. The green line is meant to indicate the processes that are being demanded by integrated project delivery, by BIM, and by the concepts of lean architecture, and they're moving the process, the decisions, and the information earlier in the process. So in addition to having the PPD as a deliverable for schematic design phase, to have the written, that is to say, the written documents that accompany the graphic depiction of the project, the PPD can also be used for analysis and for recording and managing information, not just in the schematic design phase, but also in design development and as the project unfolds. As a deliverable, it needs to be understandable, and by that we mean that it has to be readable, and we have to think about the audience that we're writing for, because we're not just writing for an informed audience like construction specifications are written for the contractor, but it's also written for the client who has to read it and say, yes, that's what I had in mind, that's the quality level that I want for my building, and perhaps even lending institutions who are going to look over the owner's shoulder and say, yes, it looks like your team is doing their work. Recently, our firm was employed to do a peer review for a major new hospital, and along with the very schematic drawings, and I say very schematic, they were true schematic level drawings, we received approximately 1,200 pages of specifications. Now, my question is anybody going to sit and read all 1,200 pages of the specs at this point? And many of those documents were based on assumptions, and there were probably things in there that had nothing to do with the real building. So the making this thing brief and readable and understandable is very important. The second bullet, RS Means and other companies that publish cost estimating information do so with for the schematic design phase with an organization based on Uniformat. Even the government does that. ASTM has a separate version of Uniformat that's very similar to the CSI, but not as detailed. And again, the primary emphasis on that is for cost estimating. And then finally, the traditional design narratives that architects and engineers often use do not have a structured checklist to make sure that they get all the subjects covered. And so by using the PPD concept based on Uniformat, we can make sure that we talk about, or think about, I should say, all the subjects that need to be covered. Let's compare Masterformat and Uniformat. Masterformat is as it says here, is a documentary classification system. It's a lot like the Dewey Decimal System that is used for arranging books on library shelves. Although there's some logic in the sequence and grouping of related subjects, the breakdown is essentially arbitrary. There's no reason why concrete and masonry, for example, couldn't be in a division together. And why is concrete division 3 instead of division 7? There's no underlying compelling reason for that. Masonry was actually invented before concrete, so why does it come after concrete? And that's not a criticism of Masterformat, which has been CSI's flagship for many years and an essential part of the construction industry. It's just to say that Masterformat's primary purpose is to have pigeonholes for all the products and activities from which a facility is constructed, rather than being useful for other purposes. Uniformat is an approach to basically the same information, but it is an analytical classification system that breaks down a complex subject, a constructed facility, into meaningful systems, subsystems, and assemblies. It's not that Uniformat is superior, it's just that it's better for different things. An illustration that I might use for this is if you could imagine a car, all the parts that make up a new car were taken and disassembled and laid out on a warehouse floor. Now the parts guy would want to take all the screws and put them together, and all the nuts and bolts, put them together, and the rubber hoses, put those in another pile over here, put the wheels in one pile, put the belts in another pile, and so forth, and group things by the commonality of what they're like. On the other hand, and that's, we might say, is similar to the Masterformat approach. On the other hand, the Uniformat approach would be, oh, I see an alternator. Well, let's see, now where's the bracket that holds that? And let's say we need a nut to attach it, and there's the wiring harness. Okay, let's put that in one pile. Now let's get all together the parts for the exhaust system, and let's put that in a pile. And if we start breaking down that big pile into little piles of the parts that go together, all of a sudden it suggests how the car would actually be put together as a whole. And that's the concept between Uniformat. And in many ways, they're both can be viewed as a type of a database. And here's a little diagram I cooked up to show that as an example, is that all of these bits and pieces are concrete, but they fit into different parts. For example, the concrete for foundations fits into element A, substructure. Architectural concrete exterior walls would be element B, the shell. Concrete fill for steel stairs and sealed concrete floors as element C, interiors, and so forth. So for analyzing the building, the facility, and talking about it in the meaningful functional elements and what they do in the building, we use Uniformat to organize that information. The same information, though, can be resorted when we need to do construction specifications, and all of these little blocks of information would go in one section, the cast-in-place concrete, under the Masterformat organization. So, as I mentioned earlier, the industry trends that we need to deal with are all pointing to the fact that we need to understand the building much earlier. It's not just enough to describe what the project would look like when it's constructed. That we need to, it's more than ever that we need to understand how the parts that make up the facility, the design for this facility, will in fact function. If the project is described only with information in an unstructured design narrative, or even if organized by Masterformat, the mechanical engineer would have to expend time to, in effect, do a element description. So the thinking is, well, why not we just do it right the first case instead of having to make somebody rethink something. Calculations for exterior envelope assemblies include things that are not specified. We don't specify the air that's in the cavity behind the brick veneer, but we need to take that into account for doing the energy modeling and to ensure our compliance with the energy code. And then finally, a very important concept is using Uniformat to analyze the content of work packages. More and more projects are being done with at least one or two early release packages, and many projects are being done with multiple work packages. It makes more sense to break those down, like in our automobile analogy, where we're saying, okay, well, I need to put that alternator group together at one time in the schedule, but the exhaust system can come later or whatever. But we think of those sub-assemblies and systems in terms of the schedule and what needs to be done when in working with the contractor. So that tells us, well, when do I need to specify this, that, or the other?
Say, Louis, just a question for you. Maybe you're explaining this sometime later, but what do you do to try to deal with some of the many options that might be available to the designers early on?
Oh.
For instance, if you're considering multiple wall systems or multiple roof systems.
Yes, that's an excellent point, David. And that's one of the things that can be done in the preliminary project description. Again, it works, I think, better by using the Uniformat descriptions, because then we can describe the two or three roof system assemblies in parallel and indicate which ones are the alternatives, and we can then price those out individually. We can also look at other performance criteria that may affect the ultimate and final design decision. One of the advantages of doing the preliminary project description as described in the CSI manuals of practice and now in PPD format is that you can describe the building without making final design decisions. And here is a diagram that talks a little bit about how, again, the analytical organization. We have the facility. We break it down into the basic 8 elements. Element B is the shell. There's a sub-element at a different level, and then finally we get down to exterior walls. And then that wall has multiple components. Each component has certain attributes that go with it. And then everything in the dotted line is the line item description for that. Notice that the designation for the exterior wall has a decimal extension, and that can work with your BIM software because you're going to have multiple instances or types of exterior walls, interior walls, various types of doors, and so forth. So for the first time now, by using the PPD, we can very closely relate our written descriptions with what we're drawing with BIM. And this shows how a specific instance or a type of category of objects could be numbered and then analyzed into its constituent components. At early stages, it's not always possible to assign master format numbers to the components, but as decisions are made and new data added to the model, those numbers can be added along with more information about the component attributes. For example, a roof might initially be described as simply a membrane type with a certain amount of insulation. The decision as to whether it would be EPDM, PVC, or TPO might not be made until after SD cost estimating, or as David suggested earlier, we can have multiple descriptions and compare those costs as part of our analysis of the design. The master format number for the roofing membrane component then would not be determined until the final design decision as to which type of roofing would actually be used. So a primary purpose then, a new purpose for the PPD is to record and manage design information as the design progresses. A method is needed so that what project managers would like to do is have a BIM job that at the end of the job you push a button and a set of specs is created automatically. That's not going to be possible for many years, if ever. The project specifier must become the information manager for the project, advising on what information needs to be created, when it needs to be created, and coordinating how and where information is stored and communicated. So it is obvious that the specifier must start working on a project from the very beginning. There are, of course, at the moment, hardware and software limitations on BIM, and as that software and our skills develop, we will be able to store more and more information. But right now, there are some limitations. On the other hand, there are also some inherent limitations, that things that will never be model objects, such as the paint here, Division 1 work, sustainability goals. These are not objects in the model. Another good example is flashing. We can show the windows in the BIM model, but we're still going to have to rely on 2D drafting to show flashing. And so flashing is not an object in the BIM model. PPDs can also be used to record design decisions and information so that and to communicate them among the design team. This is can be a centralized repository that all the team members can be working on, because many of the elements will cross discipline lines. So, for example, the architectural concrete. The architectural team is going to want to design what the texture and the surface of the skin is, but the structural guys are going to need to tell us what the strength of that concrete is, what the reinforcing is, and so forth. If there are lights in those walls, then the electrical team is going to need to describe the blockouts and the conduit to provide power for the lighting, and so forth. So we need to be thinking in a more holistic way, and by organizing the information like this and giving it a central repository, we can do that. The traditional method of designing is like beads on a string. You start with one phase, and then you basically throw away what you've done and you start over. One of the main objections that a lot of people have to doing outline specifications is that it's a throwaway object. It's something that you don't reuse. It's a one-use object. But our goal is, like the diagram at the bottom of the slide, is to have tributaries that feed into a stream, and we constantly build on what's gone before so that we're not redoing information and we're not wasting effort. So, some basic concepts about PPD is these descriptions. We describe what the building would be like if it was already constructed and sitting out on that site. We don't have to say the contractor shall. Uniformat is also good, a very similar kind of structure for doing existing building surveys for due diligence reports and other purposes. In our descriptions, we need to balance technical accuracy with descriptions that have minimal jargon. Again, remember your audience, and that your client, who is not an architect or an engineer, is going to be reading this thing and needs to understand it so that they can make an informed decision about what the facility is going to be. Adjusting the level of detail to the project. More complex projects or publicly funded projects may need more detail. If the contractor is already on board and knowledgeable about the project and the owner's expectations, less detail may be needed. Adjusting the level of detail for individual functional components. When we start out, when we write the PPD, we may know a whole lot more about the roofing system than we do about the curtain wall, because there are only 3 or 4 different types of roofing systems probably that we would consider, and we may already know which one it is. The owner may even have preferred products. For example, owners that have multiple buildings usually have pretty pointed opinions or requirements about what they want for their roof. Installation requirements are not needed if the results are described. For example, if you were doing a PPD for a warehouse with a super flat floor, we simply describe the end result of the desired flatness and levelness, and the contractor can price it with appropriate accuracy at this stage of design. Well, what does the PPD look like? This is an example of the outline format, and this was taken straight from our new publication, PPD format. And this is a familiar appearance. We start out with a paragraph that has a brief description of what the element is and how it acts in the building. The second paragraph talks about some of the functional requirements, in this case thermal performance and aesthetic requirements. And then element C, we begin this analysis of breaking it down into the constituent components and describing what those need to be like. This is the new format that was introduced in PPD format, and is one that I've been using for nearly 20 years, and shows how you can arrange the information in a tabular format. One of the things that can be done is that this tabular format can be transferred from a Word document, for example, into an Excel document, and you can add additional columns on the right-hand side for quantity, unit price, and then the line item price, so that you could pass that document on to your estimator or your construction manager or so forth, who can then use that as a living document. And again, then we have a value stream, a data stream, rather than I give them a standalone document, they create a new document, and maybe there's some things that get missed in between. Again, we're showing how the Uniformat category or number is then given some decimal extensions for individual instances. In this case, we have exterior walls, and there are common thermal and aesthetic requirements for both types of exterior walls. And so those are described here. And then we describe the basic construction of the two essential types of walls, and you're going to have more than one type, obviously, on those projects. And then, again, the components down here that make up those walls, again, that are common components. Both masonry veneer and the metal panel walls have steel studs, for example, and they have the exterior wall vapor retarders, air barriers, and the insulation. And that's one way of doing that. To compare these, the outline format is certainly the familiar appearance, but on the other hand, folks are a little more tempted to try to go into their spec masters and copy large blocks of text that are irrelevant to the purpose at the moment. Now, I have to say that my analysis is more than a bit biased because of my own personal preference for the tabular format, but there is a very real advantage in encouraging brevity, and that's one of the great things about the tabular format. It is important to have a template that has enough subjects from Uniformat for PPDs so that you can use it as a checklist and that you don't miss seldom used items, and you don't have to constantly be flipping back and forth between the document that you're trying to write, the PPD, and the Uniformat. I have a table format tailored to the types of projects most commonly done by my firm, and I can give this table to the project designer in electronic form and ask the designer to simply start filling out this right-hand column. I give it to him in blank. I have these filled in, and just let them do it almost stream of consciousness. And then I can go back in at a later date and tweak it with some technical information and coordinate between the different types and things. I often get the response from designers that they find this exercise very meaningful to them because it makes them think about things that they had not previously considered in the design. And again, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for making sure that we think about everything that's necessary and that this is part of it. This is an analytical tool, a way of better understanding the project. So here's a suggested workflow, developing the master template or maybe multiple templates if your firm does multiple kinds of projects. My firm, one of our major divisions is for healthcare projects, and I might work with that group of folks to develop a template that would be used for hospitals and clinics. Then to populate that draft with specific instances of elements and assign numbers that are coordinated with the BIM objects and software that your firm uses. Encouraging the designers to provide that first pass at the basic element descriptions, and then the specifier can edit that draft. My previous firm liked to make its schematic design presentations in 11 by 17 format with lots of color and pictures and jazzed up plans and wall sections. And we, in fact, put the PPD directly in that book so that it was fully integrated. We printed it in 3 columns to make it easy reading so that the paragraph width was not too great. And that way we didn't have to be concerned about having a separate written document that might get separated from the drawings. It's all in one package, and the owner could and the other users could go through it and work on it. I want to talk a little bit about where we might go from here. I would like to see CSI develop Uniformat and Masterformat into a single electronic integrated database that would allow users to put data into it for specific instances of functional elements. The PPD then could be a report that is actually generated from that database. In the DD phase, Many firms are now putting more data and decisions into the SD version of the PPD and providing it as the deliverable instead of outline specifications. This has the advantage, again, of building on that data stream and not starting over with what is essentially a throwaway document. An example would be that in the SD phase, we might describe the curtain wall in very generic terms. We want a 2.5 inch by 6 inch profile, clear anodized finish. On the glass, we want a certain solar heat gain coefficients and so forth. In the DD phase, by that time, we should be saying, well, the curtain wall is, basis of design is going to be a Vista Wall CW250, and the glass is going to be PPG R100. So we can just simply add that information in as we go along and refine it rather than starting over. And that, by having the master format numbers for the constituent components in the database as these final design decisions are made, at the end of the DD phase, that could be resorted and printed then by the master format numbers as a deliverable. That list in turn would become the kernel for developing a full set of construction specifications as part of the contract documents. If the specifications were also prepared by using a database instead of word processing, the contractor could update information indicating which brands of products were actually used in the work, which of the 5 sealants I specified they actually used, and at the completion, that data could be resorted back into Uniformat elements for use in facilities management. I'm a dreamer. Someday it might even be possible for design professionals to enter written information into the master BIM database in such a way that the model actually changes to match the written data and decisions. As this old specifier used to say when I walked through the bullpen, draw it the way I write it, guys. Questions? Discussion?
Louis, I have one for you, and I didn't hear you mention the PPD as a quality control tool as you're going through the design process. Because we had one actual owner that required that we kept the PPD active throughout the design process, and that was his primary reason as a quality control tool to check the design having completed or having actually done what the PPD had required.
Well, I think that's an important concept, David, because the advancement from schematic design to design development needs to be, a signed formal approval by the owner. And then as the design development progresses, somebody needs to look back at the PPD and say, does our design still match up with that? Are we simply refining and developing what was there, or have we departed from it and changed it? So there is a sense in which the PPD is certainly a contract document between the design team and the owner. And as you say, it should be used and developed in parallel with the drawings to keep us on track and to make sure that we're doing the right thing. One of our, of course, great fears is that we get a contractor who prices something at the schematic design level and we change it in design development, and all of a sudden the cost estimate at the end of DD phase is out of whack. And he says, well, but I priced it according to what you wrote here. So we have to, that's an important idea, and that concept of the data stream helps us avoid omissions, inadvertent changes in material, that the changes need to be documented and tracked. Does that answer your question, David?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'd like to ask our group members here, especially the ones that are actually using PPDs, how their experience has gone with the document and to what use they've put it. So maybe you could chime in, either raise your hand and Erica will unmute you so you can chat with Louis and I, or you can just type in a question or your own comment in the chat window.
Okay, Thomas Smith has a question. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Absolutely.
Hey, Lewis. One thing, following up on Dave's comment about quality control, you might want to mention something about using it as a basis for commissioning as well, because it's kind of the commissioning and the quality control, what David just described, kind of work hand in glove.
Yes, that's true, Tommy. Again, because the PPD promotes a holistic understanding of the whole facility, that we're not just drawing pretty pictures on the one hand and have a separate set of documents that tell a little bit about some of the materials, but it helps us understand how the building is supposed to perform, and that's an essential part, I think, of the commissioning process.
Okay, Joe Antrella has a comment. He says, use during the SD phase only.
Well, again, that's the traditional and one might say orthodox CSI view that's been promoted for many years in the manual of practice. I will say also that the AIA contract documents between the owner and the architect they actually state outline specifications for the design development. They do not state a PPD for schematic design. It's a little more the generic description of what they want, of what is to be required. We'll say this, though, that on the other hand, the AIA has always kind of left up to CSI what specifications should be like, and for us to define that. And so I think that by taking the preliminary project description and fleshing it out, making those generic descriptions a little more specific and beginning to populate it with actual product selections, it certainly qualifies the intent for outline specifications at the end of DDs. But again, if you'd prefer to do outline specifications, or there may be contractual reasons for doing so, that's certainly the approved method.
Lewis, I have no other questions or comments at this time.
Well, I appreciate very much this opportunity to share some of these ideas with such a august group of people. This is something I have found to be a very practical and usable tool. It's sometimes with the consultants, it takes a little persuading to get them to come online and provide brief descriptions that I can plug into my PPDs, but it's worth the effort of doing this. And now with the advent of BIM, so that we can link our descriptions with model objects, and with the integrated project delivery, we need to make better decisions and understand the project much better at earlier stages. I just think that there's an overwhelmingly compelling reason to start using the PPD format if you haven't already done so. And I recommend this wonderful publication that David and I had a hand in producing. So I'll turn it back to you, Erica, and thank you again for this opportunity and the privilege of getting to speak to everyone.
Lewis, I'd like to thank you for your time today and appreciate the presentation that you did make for the group. And I would just suggest that one thing that the group may consider is that when we're writing project specifications and we're trying to, in effect, interview the designers, the architects, to try to pick their brain about what the project really is, to learn what the products are, many times, or most times, when we start talking about the project in terms of a master format and going down through the spec sections and trying to get individual product information, the discussion turns very quickly to a Uniformat approach because it's much easier early on in the project to talk about an exterior wall as opposed to what brick tie do I need. So the designers tend to focus that way, and the discussion tends to migrate that way. So even if you're not using a PPD or producing a PPD, it still becomes a valuable tool to be able to collect information and be able to organize information early on in the project. I don't know if anybody else on the call has comments about how they might be using the at least Uniformat in that early session. I'd like to be able to hear what your thoughts are on that too.
Louis, I do have a question. Will your presentation be available to the group after the webinar?
I can certainly email it to you, Erica, if you want to post it someplace.
Certainly.
I had a minor problem, and actually I had improved a couple of the diagrams a little bit, and but for some reason or other I had some issues with recovering that. So I won't send it to you this afternoon, but yes, I will send it to you, and you can make it available to the group.
Okay, we'll post it with the blog notes. Thank you. Any parting comments, David?
Only I hope that everyone will join us next month, and looking at the calendar, that would put us at July 1st, same time, same station, 3 o'clock. So I have not decided a topic for next month just yet. Having just come out of Construct and finally put being host chapter for Construct 2010 behind us, now it's back to normal. So I'll get my thoughts organized and we'll get a topic posted. If any of you in the group have specific suggestions, I would certainly invite you to email me or email Erica with whatever your suggestions are, and I will certainly take those into account. We'd like to make this a discussion that you're going to be part of, so we want to address the topics that you're most interested in. So I look forward to seeing you next month.
And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation in the Specifying Practice Group, and a special thank you to today's discussion leader, Louis Metcalf. You may now disconnect.